Hi! I have a video lesson for you today to help you with your academic writing. I'm going to take you through how to use although, even though, in spite, despite, in spite of the fact that, and some other phrases that you can use to help make your academic writing look more advanced, and how you can follow some rules to help you remember how to use these phrases correctly. Okay, let's get started. Grammar lesson, adverb clauses of contrast. With although, even though, while, whereas, despite, in spite of, etc. By speaking with Steph. What is an adverb clause? An adverb clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb that acts like an adverb. It is used in a complex sentence. What is a complex sentence? This means that it has an independent and a dependent clause. What are the two types of clauses? One, independent. This means that it can stand alone and is a complete sentence. The other one is dependent. This means that it cannot stand alone and can act like a noun, adjective, or adverb. Let's look at an example with although. Rule: if the adverb is at the beginning, you must have a comma after that first clause. Although it's cold outside, he's wearing shorts. So notice the comma after that first clause. Although it's cold outside, comma, he's wearing shorts. Which part of this sentence is the independent clause? It's the second one. He's wearing shorts. The first one is a dependent clause because you can't make a complete sentence that says, although it's cold outside. Notice, the although adverb can be in the middle too. He's wearing shorts, although it's cold outside. So we just moved it to the middle of the sentence. Notice this rule. If the adverb is in the middle, you don't need a comma. Here's another example. My son has to wear a jacket to school even though he doesn't want to. So notice we have the adverb even though in the middle, and so we don't need a comma. What's the difference between although, even though, and though? They all have the same meaning, that something is surprising, unexpected, or a contrast. However, though is not as common. So in my experience, I use although and even though much more than though as a contrastive adverb. Let's look at this rule. Use a subject and a verb after these adverbs when they come at the beginning of the sentence. So we have although, and then we have it, which is the subject, and then is the verb. And then we have comma, and we have another subject, he, and then is wearing, the verb. So it's adverb plus subject plus verb, and then the object, if you have an object, and then comma, subject plus verb, and then an object. Notice the first clause is dependent, and the second one is independent. Here's a rule. Use subject plus verb, and then the adverb in the middle, followed by subject and verb. So the same sentence, we just moved it around, right? So he, the subject, is wearing, verb, shorts is the object, and then adverb, although, it is the subject, is the verb, and cold is the adjective that describes how it is. So now we have the independent clause in the beginning plus the dependent clause. Let's look at some other adverbs. Maybe you've heard of these before. Despite and in spite of. How do we use despite and in spite of? Here's an example sentence. Despite the rain, we still had our long walk. Despite the rain, we still had our long walk. Here's a rule. When you use either despite or in spite of, you must follow with a noun or a gerund. So let's look at that one that we just saw. Despite, and then plus the noun, the rain. What does despite and in spite of mean? These words and phrases have a similar meaning to although and even though. They mean without being affected by or regardless of. So if we think about that other sentence, right? Regardless of the rain, or without being affected by the rain, we still had a long walk. So you can kind of think of it like that. Let's look at another sentence with in spite of. In spite of being tired, I studied until 2 a.m. So you can think about it again, right? There's a contrast here. You're tired, so you should probably sleep, but instead you studied until 2 a.m., right? So regardless of being tired, you still studied until 2 a.m. When you use either despite or in spite of, remember you must follow by a noun or a gerund. So in this example, in spite of is followed by a gerund, being. What is a gerund? A gerund is the verb with the ing, but it acts like a noun. Can we use in spite of and despite in the middle of a sentence? Yes, you can. Remember, you don't need a comma when you do this. Example, I studied until 2 a.m. in spite of being tired. So now we just moved in spite of to the middle of the sentence. When should we use despite the fact that and in spite of the fact that? So now we've added the fact that to these adverbs. These are more formal and are great for academic writing and speeches. Let's look at a sentence. In spite of the fact that the pandemic is still going on, college students are coming to class. So, in spite of the fact that the pandemic is still going on, and then you have a comma, right? Because it's at the beginning of the sentence. College students are coming to class. What's the grammar rule for using in spite of the fact that? Rule: after in spite of the fact that, use a subject and a verb. So here we have this example, right? We have the adverb clause in spite of the fact that, and then we have the pandemic, and then is still going on. So you have the subject and the verb. All right, let's look at two other ones, while and whereas. When should we use while and whereas? My brother is good at math. Now notice that we have a comma before while and whereas. It's a little bit different than the other ones we looked at. It has a different use. A different rule with the comma. My brother is good at math, comma, whereas I'm good at science. What do while and whereas mean? Let's look at that sentence again. My brother is good at math, while I'm good at science. What do you think it means? They both have the idea of contrast or comparison of opposites. Notice that while has a different meaning when talking about time. It's not a contrast. But here we're not talking about time, right? We're talking about a comparison or a contrast of two different brothers. Should I use a comma before whereas and while in the middle of the sentence? Yes. Use a comma before whereas and while in the middle of the sentence. So this is different than the use of although, even though, despite, in spite of. Remember, those don't need a comma in the middle of the sentence. Okay, now quiz yourself. Fill in the blank. You can pause the video if you need more time. So what should you add to this sentence? You could add although, even though, despite the fact that. All of those would work. Here's another one. what would you put here? Remember that after despite or in spite of, you can use a gerund, being, right? So these are the only two that you could use in this one. Despite or in spite of. Do you know what early bird means or night owl? So I like to go to sleep early, but he likes to stay up late. So early bird means to go to bed early, and staying up late means night owl. Here you could use whereas or while. Could you use anything else? Definitely. You could use although, even though. Those ones would work also. Here's a final one. We need to fly home to visit my mom. What should we put after that? Again, you could use although, even though, despite the fact that.